Today's teaching is on the meaning of refuge, and perhaps all of you have had refuge, but I wanted to cover this as a means of kind of review and renewing our understanding and deepening our commitment to refuge. And I think it's especially important these times that the chaos and the uncertainty, the possibility that we could catch a incurable disease, or our loved ones could catch an incurable disease, or anybody could catch an incurable disease and die, brings to mind how precarious our situation is and how precious life is. And with that preciousness comes the idea that it's too precious to squander. So refuge offers the possibility and the reality of cutting through and transforming our limitations and our negative patterns and our confusion. It is considered the gate to the path. If you are practicing, no matter what practices you're doing, if you haven't taken refuge, you have not entered the path. You're still on the outside looking in. And of course, it is, as I said, good to kind of keep it fresh as a foundation for traveling the path. And this is why so many of the deity practices that we do towards the beginning, if not at the beginning, will have a short refuge prayer, which goes something like, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha until I reach enlightenment. So this is important that, as I kind of said at the very beginning, worldly sources of refuge are very unreliable. We're seeing right now how unreliable the government is to protect us. We're seeing how unreliable the healthcare system, they just are not prepared for this, even though they are working extraordinarily long hours and under very difficult situations, and so on. But even with the best medical care, people still die from this disease. And of course, our friends, our relatives, science, knowledge, education, our possessions, all of these are really not long-term or refuges of any kind. They can give us a little short-term security, but that's about it. And the same thing with nature. It's great to be able to go out in nature and walk in these times, to get out of the house, and nature can be very peaceful and so forth, but it's no ultimate refuge. Now, the defects of not taking refuge are, and that is refuge in the three jewels, are that our confusion just gets deeper and deeper. We just keep accumulating more and more karma. And so I'm going to give a plug for Tuesday night at 6 o'clock. We will be discussing karma by Trala Rinpoche. And I will be posting some previous talks from this book class too in this next week. So our confusion gets deeper, our karma and our habitual patterns get thicker, and we just keep getting stuck in worldly matters. One very, very important phrase in Buddhism is precious human birth. That there's a meditation about our human birth, and I will shorten it here. But very simply, that There are a total of 6 different possible births that we can have in samsara, and the human one is the best, the most favorable. And it is because in the human realm, our suffering and our happiness are relatively moderate, and we go back and forth. Sometimes we're happy, and sometimes we're not so happy, and we're suffering. But it's a mixture. And because of that mixture, we're not totally overwhelmed with suffering. And we can, if we put our minds and our bodies to it, we can set aside time to learn about the Dharma, to contemplate it, and to practice it. And since we have time to do that, we can then travel the path and attain liberation. So some other benefits that we have with our human birth is that we have been born uh, in a situation where we can come in contact with the Dharma, and that not only that, but you have met Dharma teachers, you have an interest in the Dharma, you can understand the Dharma, and that your physical and mental capacity is such that you can learn, practice, understand, contemplate, and actually travel the path. There are many human beings that are born all over the world, and in this country too, that just don't have the opportunity to. A homeless person, it's highly unlikely that they will come in contact with the Dharma and practice Dharma. And the same thing for people that are mentally ill, are developmentally disabled, and so on down the line. So our human birth is extremely precious. And if you look at the number of people in the world today and the number of people that not only are Buddhist, but they're actively practicing it, they're actually interested in traveling the path rather than just having a more pleasant lifetime this time or having a more pleasant rebirth next time. So if you are actually interested in traveling the path and getting out ultimately, you are really in a very, very, very small minority of people in this world. And that's what really makes human birth so precious, so valuable. But again, as this COVID-19 epidemic is showing, that life is very fragile and it can be very transient. And so the idea is now is the time to practice. And many of you probably have more time at home to practice. And so please do what you can to practice and increase the amount of time that you spend studying, contemplating, and practicing. So there is a brief little analogy about how the student is to relate, having taken refuge, to the teachings. And the idea is that you want to be like a pot that is empty, so that the teacher can pour the teachings into the pot, and the pot will retain the teachings. The approaches that don't work would be a pot that is upturned. In other words, turned over. And that doesn't work because no matter how much is poured on it, nothing sticks, it all runs off. So that is where having an open mind and being enthusiastic about the teachings is really important. Some people approach the Dharma like they know it all already, but they just need a little bit of this or a little bit of that, or they come because of they like the social contact or whatever. And there's really no benefit, or very, very little benefit from that. In fact, what happens is your arrogance gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So another wrong approach is to be like a pot with some poison in the bottom of it. And then no matter how much of the teachings are poured into that pot, it's still poisoned. And this happens when you have some ideas that are non-dharmic and you don't realize it, or you don't care, and you mix them with the Dharma that you hear, and it becomes something very different, and it takes you in a very wrong direction. So it's really important to examine what we are bringing to the Dharma and what we are adding to the Dharma, if we are adding to the Dharma. And here, contact with a teacher is really important, because the teacher can help guide you in the right direction. Frequently, what my experience has been is, in these two examples that I just gave, is they really don't want to have much to do with the teacher because they know more than the teacher, or they're afraid that the teacher will tell them that they're wrong, and they don't want to be wrong. The third wrong approach is a pot with a crack in the bottom of it. And here, the teacher pours in the teachings, but because of that crack, they're not retained. And if they're not retained, they're not practiced. So it's important that we do what we can to retain the teachings and apply them. A good phrase that I really like is take them into your experience. And at that point, the teaching becomes you. So don't just keep them conceptual. Take these teachings, apply them, and bring them into your experience. So there are three ways to take refuge. And I kind of touched on these already. The first is to have a better next life and to be a success in this life. And then another one is liberation for yourself, which is Hinayana style liberation. And it is possible to do that, but this does not have the aspiration to attain liberation for all sentient beings. It is that you are just mainly tired of suffering and you want to get out and end your suffering. This does not lead to complete Buddhahood. So the way Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche always gives refuge is for the Mahayana motivation, that we want to take refuge so that not only will we have refuge from suffering, but we can liberate all sentient beings. And this refuge vow will last until enlightenment. The Hinayana refuge vow and the one before that about having a better life and worldly success and better next life, that'll last for one lifetime. But the Mahayana motivation will last until you are enlightened. And of course, when you come back next time, you'll need to take it again, but it does last. So when we do the Mahayana refuge, we're asking all enlightened beings to help us liberate sentient beings. So the objects of refuge are the Buddha, who represents perfect wisdom and perfect compassion. So he is an example and an inspiration. Buddha literally means the awakened one. The Tibetan word for Buddha is Sangye, and it means to eliminate and to purify. And so a Buddha has eliminated all of his negativities. He's eliminated all of his obscurations and confusion. He has eliminated and purified all of his karma. And the other is blossom. And what has blossomed is all of his qualities, the perfect wisdom, the perfect compassion, the perfect love, and also perfection, but it is perfection that is beyond being good and bad. So this is the Buddha, and he is the ultimate refuge. And I'll tell you, I was thinking about this. I've been doing that Sakya Nadro prayer, and I'm going to go bring that up because it had what I found is a unusual line in it. And so let's see here. It's going to come up now. And so it has the regular refuge, which is I take refuge in the three jewels. I take refuge in the yidams, the dakinis, the Dharma protectors. And then this is the new line. We go for refuge to our own mind, the empty, clear Dharmakaya. And this is the Buddha, the empty, clear Dharmakaya. For those of you that attended my talk on Tara, this might have been when we actually met at the Shambhala Center. I talked about who White Tara is, and she is the Dharmakaya. She is the unity of emptiness and wisdom. And so this is Buddha. He is the ultimate refuge. But as that line from the Sakya Nadro says, that ultimately that is our own nature. And when you attain enlightenment, then you become your own refuge. You no longer take refuge in some external Buddha. You have become the Buddha. You are your own refuge. And this is Dharmakaya. So the next object of refuge is the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha and the path to enlightenment. So these are our methods and our tools. And also, we need courage to work with sentient beings because this is Mahayana refuge. We need confidence that we can do it. And we need compassion. I hadn't thought about that before, but those are 3 C's: courage, confidence, and compassion. And all of these are good to have, essential to have. And this is not either you have it or you don't. It's all a process that as we travel the path, our courage increases, our confidence increases, and our compassion increases. If we didn't need to increase those, maybe we'd be a Buddha by now. So there's also the element of wisdom, which is knowing that temporary happiness isn't the solution. That by definition, temporary happiness is temporary, and we can't go from one temporary happy situation to another. It just doesn't work that way. I'm sure it hasn't worked for you so far in your life, and it's not going to work that way in the future. So, extending compassion for some beings and others too is not the solution. Again, we're going to start there because we're not perfectly enlightened Buddhas, but the direction we're going is to increase our compassion for more and more and more beings. So the aspiration to liberate all sentient beings is the union of wisdom and compassion. So the compassion is this element of not wanting beings to suffer. Wisdom is wanting them to have complete freedom from suffering. So they're like two wings of a bird. And this union of compassion and wisdom speeds up the removal of our confusion and obscurations. The Sangha are realized beings and teachers who show one the path and give teachings. We can't receive teachings directly from the Buddha, but we can from this Sangha. And so a teacher is very important in order to travel the path. The teacher is the one that gives you direct instructions. And it is said in Tibetan Buddhism that because of that, these highly realized teachers, in a way, are more important to you than the Buddha, because you cannot meet the Buddha. And so the realized Sangha are extremely important and considered venerable, to say the least. There are different meanings of Sangha. Another meaning of Sangha that is frequently used is the ordained Sangha. All the monks and nuns, and that is from the top down. The Karmapa is an ordained monk. And then a even larger definition is the Buddhist community. And that would be including everybody who has taken refuge and has faith in the teachings of the Buddha. So as I have said, the Dharma and the Sangha are our refuge as we're traveling the path, as well as the Buddha. But when we reach the goal of the path, which is enlightenment, then we no longer take refuge in the Dharma and the Sangha, because we don't need refuge in them. I read a quote by Kalu Rinpoche, which has stuck with me for decades and decades, and I wish I could remember the whole quote. But it went something like this. You are the Buddha. The Buddha is in this very room, and you are the Buddha. But for those of you who do not easily understand this, we have this very complicated Buddhist path of Hinayana, Mahayana, and Vajrayana with all the deities and all the different colors and ham implements and so on and so forth that we have to travel. But for a person who is easily convinced, all of this would be totally useless. So if you can convince yourself that you are the Buddha and really understand it, the Dharma and the Sangha are totally useless to you. But by golly, we're so attached to our egos, we don't get it. We can't let go. And so that's why we have the path. And so this is kind of going into what the problem is in a little more detail. That in the past, all our attempts to create happiness and to have lasting happiness have just been the cause for future suffering, whether it be because of the karma, the negative karma that we created while we're trying to have happiness, or because after the happiness is gone, we then were attached to it, and now there's a lot of pain when the happiness is gone. Both of those things can happen. And the reason why we did that is we were ignorant of the ways to achieve happiness. And the source of this ignorance is, first of all, the cognitive obscuration, which very simply is taking that which is not a self to be a self, and that which is not an other to be an other. We solidify both who we are and who others are. Instead of seeing the interdependence that causes us to be where we are right now and who we are, and the same thing with other people, we think that there is something solid there, something permanent, something that needs to be protected, something that needs to be proved, and so forth. And so from that, then we start making the decisions of this is pleasant and that is unpleasant. I want more of the pleasant. I want less of the unpleasant. And I can ignore things that I don't have a strong attraction or aversion to. These are our kleshas, the klesha obscuration. But not only that, then we add to those three main ones, we add pride or arrogance, and we add jealousy. So we go around through our lives, going from one klesha to another to another. It seems like we specialize in one, and then there's another one that we have a competency in. So it might be that your particular klesha is desire and attachment. But then when you look around at other people, you start developing jealousy because they have more than you have. But it's primarily your attachment that is the big problem. So that's what I'm talking about here with the main klesha. Or the one we have competency that we visit, not as much as the main one, but we still spend a lot of time in our minds and in our activities engaging in. So on top of that, the next level of obscuration is our habitual patterns or our karma. Karma, well, I asked Rinpoche this question, and that was about habitual patterns. And he said that that's the most insidious form of karma because they're so strong. And it comes with us, habitual patterns come with us from one lifetime to the next. And habitual patterns really bind us. They're like chains. They take away our freedom. A situation arises, and immediately we engage in a habitual response. And we just keep going more and more and more of the same old, same old, same old. Mental conditioning is another aspect of karma. So it is how we interpret incoming information, how we interpret whatever we experience. Everybody experiences things differently. I think all of us have heard stories about trials, and you'll have different witnesses explaining what they saw, perhaps at the time of the crime. And everybody gives a slightly different version, even though they all saw the same thing. And that's what this mental conditioning does. We see things differently. And then we react according to our habitual patterns. And this just keeps the confusion getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And on top of that, to to explain the situation we're in a little bit clearer, Rinpoche says that our associates and influences previously have also been confused beings, have not been realized beings. And again, this is the importance of having a realized teacher, because now you have an example, a real life, flesh and blood example that can help you clarify your confusion and so forth. And then one thing that I know I have felt or fallen for this trap myself. And this is a trap to avoid. And that is that it's easy to say, well, the problem is the culture that we live in, or the government, or the government leader, the president, and so forth. And that's what the problem is. And there's a Tibetan saying, and that is we look into a mirror, see a dirty face, and try to wash the mirror. This isn't about what is wrong with other people. This is about looking at ourselves and seeing our own faults, and then working with them to uproot them and weaken their influence on us. So another error is that we don't see the Buddha nature in others, especially the ones we dislike. And so it's really important to remind yourself that everybody has Buddha nature. It's just that some people are, it's buried extremely deeply. Milarepa killed 35 people before he became a serious Dharma practitioner. So this is important to remember. Again, going around condemning other people, and it's really easy to do this these days, but going around condemning other people, well, you are not working on yourself and your own attitudes and so forth, is not understanding how to practice Dharma. I will say this, that I believe it was Tai Situ Rinpoche. He gave a talk. It was a short talk, maybe 17 minutes, that I found on YouTube about the COVID epidemic. And he said that it was really important to have sincerity and to speak truthfully. And through those two, we develop wisdom. So if you see that people, our leaders, for instance, are not sincere and they're not speaking truthfully, it's best for us to look inside and see, are we speaking truthfully and sincerely? And then, of course, you don't have to listen to lies. Doesn't mean you don't see people when they're lying. But, you know, even Trump has a Buddha nature. So another wrong approach is that people come to Buddhism and they want to clean up the world before they clean up themselves. And it's really important that we look at our motivation and we see ourselves clearly and realize we have limitations and realize that we are, or try to see when you are acting more out of desperation than out of wisdom. I had a person tell me recently that the present situation was just so hard on people in the medical profession and people that have to work even though they don't want to work because they're worried about catching it and so forth. And I'm going to write letters. And the end of the conversation, which was a telephone conversation, was, maybe I should pray. But that was an afterthought. And pray first, practice first. Hitler wanted to clean up the world. The Nazis passed laws to encourage organic gardening, protect natural forests and natural parks and so on and so forth. And they were very interested about diseases, especially the genetic diseases. So there was that motivation to clean up the world, but they sure did it in a wrong way. So we have to be very careful that we're not just creating more garbage when we go out and try to clean up the world. It's always best to come from a point of calmness and wisdom when we're working with other people, rather than one of desperation. And let's see here. Here's a review of what I said in my previous teaching about trust and faith, and that is that there is clear or receptive faith, and that is feeling gratitude that you've received refuge. It's a very precious gift. This is the feeling that if you receive it from someone like Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche or one of these exalted Sangha, the bodhisattvas, the actual bodhisattvas, a feeling of almost awe towards them. And if you have met them since you took refuge, that is excellent. Feeling that you want to be like these great bodhisattvas. The next is longing, which is the desire to travel the path and perfect yourself, and the desire to do it correctly and properly. And then finally is conviction, faith, where it's through direct experience. And then you have noticed that the path has worked as you've traveled it, even if it's that your mind is a little calmer when you're not meditating, if you are a little clearer, if you're not don't get quite so upset when you get into difficult situations as you used to. That helps really firm up our trust and conviction that this is the right things to do and it works. So the world needs compassion, sanity, and examples of people to aspire to. This is so obvious today. What I think is important is to remember your refuge name and see how it applies to you. These names might seem many times like they are random, but there's usually something in it that if the person contemplates it, looks inside of themselves, and so forth, will help them travel the path. I try to give refuge names that I feel relates to that particular person. And I'll tell you a story here. And this is where I wasn't considering the meaning of the name, but I had gone to a center, and when I first started giving refuge, I was given a stack of refuge cards, and the names were already written in them. And so this was within a few years after I completed the 3-year retreat. And I was taking the easy way out and giving these names. And so I came to the center, and I was just about at the end of my stack of refuge names. In fact, there was only one female, a very small number of female refuge names that I had left. And there was one that I had known from the beginning that I had, and I didn't want to give it out because it was Purba Lamo, and the translation was Divine Dagger Goddess. And I just didn't, I had a lot of reservations about giving that to a woman. So here I am, I'm at the center, I don't have any other cards, and I have just the exact number of female refuge names as there are women taking it. So I give that name. And it turned out after the refuge ceremony and we were taking a break, the woman I gave it to was absolutely, I don't think delighted is a strong enough word. Whether she took this name in the right way or not, I don't know, but she was into medieval armaments to the point where she had a website about medieval armaments. And a purba, you may not be aware of, but it's a knife. It's a ritual knife, a ritual dagger. So she liked being the goddess of the divine dagger. I haven't seen her since. I hope that she got more out of it than that. So to go on, finally, I'm going to talk just briefly about spiritual materialism, and then I'll open it up to questions and answers. And I probably don't have to tell you this, but this talk I put together quite a while ago. And it's important to avoid seeing Buddhism as exotic. It's certainly not exotic in Tibet. And it has worked just fine there for well over 1,000 years. I think it's been more like about 1,300 years now. So the objects, the shrine, the statues, the Tonka paintings, the ritual objects, all of these really don't save us from suffering. They help us travel along the path. And so it's traveling the path that reduces suffering, not having the objects. Uh, Khenpo Rinpoche said it's fine to be attached to Dharma objects because it's a good attachment. So if being attached to Dharma objects reduces your attachment to mundane objects, that's good. But again, the objects will not help you, or by just possessing them or being around them or thinking that they have some kind of mystical power. That's a wrong approach. The second obstacle is thinking that there's an external savior here, that the Buddha can save you, the Karmapa can save you, and so forth. We have to do the work. And it is doing the work that causes us to reduce our suffering and travel the path. We can receive blessings from these great masters. And all the blessings can do is, you might say, give us an exposure to the ultimate. Whether we see it or not is another question. Lama Yeshe Gyamtso, who is an excellent translator, he likes to translate blessings as to engulf in splendor. Whether we experience that splendor is another question. And so we have to make ourselves receptive to receive that splendor. Yeah, avoid thinking that you are better than others because you're on the path and they aren't. That's a form of arrogance. If you actually become more humble as you travel the path, that's a sign that you're traveling the path. And then finally, avoid thinking that other traditions are wrong or inferior. That the Karmapa talks about other traditions, whether they be Islamic or Christian or whatever, that all of these are not to be disparaged or talked badly about. Rinpoche said this one time, and that was, he said, there are other strong, powerful spiritual paths. There are none that are more powerful than Tibetan Buddhism. So it's fine to feel that way. And so if you feel that way, that should be all the more motivation to actually practice it and travel the path, because it works very quickly. And I recommend trying to limit the amount of books that you read that come from all kinds of different sources, even when it comes to Tibetan Buddhism. When I first started, which was back in the late 80s, there was a lot available. Nowadays, it has just absolutely exploded. You can't read it all. You don't have to read it all. You don't have to understand it all. What you need to do is understand what you do read. So it's much better to read a small number of books, study them, go back, reread, contemplate, and so forth, than just read a book, put it down, read another book, put it down, read another book, put it down. There was a man in the retreat that I did, very, very, very intelligent man. And he was a book lover. And I think he went into retreat with 2 boxes of books. And we could order, do mail order back then. And he left the retreat with 11 boxes of books. That isn't what practice is all about. You don't need 11 boxes of books to travel the path. You just need to understand a few. And so, while it's fine to read books from other traditions and so forth, it's really important to have your main concentration on the Kagyu books. And the Kagyu teachers that KTD invites to KTD to teach. So it's like you've only got so much time and so much energy. Why not concentrate it on the things that will keep you going in the direction most quickly? There's a phrase that I heard when I was young: jack of all trades and master of none. You want to master the teachings in the Kagyu lineage and His Holiness the Karmapa.